So you're picturing it, right? You want to own a dry cleaner, rent a little storefront, drop in a few machines, slap a sign in the window that says same-day service, and then you just wait for the whole neighborhood to come drop off their shirts. Here's the thing. Almost every part of that picture, it's wrong. Think about this. Why does one shop pull in a comfortable six-figure income year after year, while another shop, same equipment, same prices, literally 2 blocks away, barely scrapes by, and then quietly shuts its doors? That's not luck, not even close. It comes down to a set of hidden mechanics that most owners never really get, and by the time they figure it out, they've already signed the lease. Most folks assume dry cleaning is just laundry for people with money to burn. Fancy water, fancy soap, fancy shirts. But here's the weird part. Almost nothing inside a dry cleaning plant ever touches a single drop of water. Because water's the enemy here. Wool, silk, cashmere, those structured suits with the canvas and padding built inside, they all fall apart when they get wet. The fibers puff up, the shape caves in, the color bleeds right out. So instead of water, these machines pump a sealed drum full of a liquid chemical solvent. The clothes get soaked, spun, and rinsed in that fluid. Then the solvent gets heated up, turned into vapor, captured, and reused. And the clothes come out clean and shaped exactly the way they went in. So here's your first lesson. Dry cleaning isn't dry. It's just wet with something that isn't water. And that one little chemistry fact? That's the seed of an entire industry. Once you get that these machines aren't washing clothes, they're preserving them, everything clicks. Suddenly you understand why a wool suit runs 15 to 20 bucks to clean, while a plain cotton shirt is only 2 to 4. You're not paying for soap. You're paying so that $800 suit doesn't turn into a shrunken, felted disaster. And that's the whole business, right there. Dry cleaners don't sell clean clothes. They sell insurance against wrecking expensive ones. So who actually pays for that? 3 kinds of people, and they all think about it totally differently. The working professional pays because they've got to look sharp every single day, and nobody's got time to hand wash a blazer. The luxury clothing owner pays because a silk dress or a cashmere coat isn't just fabric, it's an asset, and they're not gambling it in a washing machine. And businesses pay because hotels, restaurants, and hospitals need thousands of uniforms and linens and gowns cleaned on a schedule, at a scale your home laundry room could never touch. Run the math for a second. If a custom suit costs $800 to replace, and tossing it in the wash might destroy it completely, then an $18 cleaning fee is what? A little over 2% of the suit's value. That's not an expense. That's a rounding error you pay to protect a way bigger number. This industry doesn't sell a wash. It sells the removal of a much scarier risk. And watch how differently these 3 customers act. The professional drops off 5 shirts a week and never even glances at the price, because looking sloppy at work costs way more than a few bucks a shirt. The luxury owner might only show up 4 or 5 times a year, but pays top dollar every time, because the alternative is rolling the dice on a coat that costs more than most people's rent. And the commercial client, a hotel, a hospital, they're not thinking about single garments at all. They're thinking bins, hundreds of pieces a week, under a contract that's got to be filled on schedule. Rain, shine, short-staffed, whatever. 3 completely different relationships, same machine. So where'd this whole no-water cleaning thing even come from? The story goes back to early 1800s France. A dye shop owner spilled some lamp fuel, turpentine, on a stained tablecloth. And once it dried, the stain was just gone. Fabric looked untouched. And boom, that accident cracked open the door to petroleum-based cleaning. For decades after, cleaners were soaking clothes in vats of gasoline and kerosene. It worked great. It also caught fire constantly, which made it one of the more, exciting small businesses to run. The real game changer was a synthetic chemical called perchloroethylene, PERC for short. PERC was heavier than water, didn't catch fire, and was incredible at cutting through grease and body oil without wrecking the dyes. For most of the 20th century, PERC was the backbone of the whole industry. But here's the catch. PERC is now heavily regulated, banned outright in some places, because of links to pollution and health risks. So for the last 20 years, the industry's been shifting to newer solvents. Some plants use refined hydrocarbon fluids, some use one called K4, and a handful of premium shops use pressurized liquid CO2 or silicone-based fluids that go easier on the environment. And whichever solvent you pick, that shapes your machinery costs, your insurance bill, and your legal exposure for decades. This isn't just a chemistry choice, it's a financial one that follows you around for years. Guess wrong on this 20 or 30 years ago, and you're probably the same owner struggling to sell your business today, because no buyer wants to inherit an aging PERC machine and the cleanup risk buried under the floor. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying learning how this hidden industry actually works, take a second to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest. Okay, now let's talk about where the money actually comes from, because it's not where you'd think. Most people picture a dry cleaner making a flat fee per shirt from walk-ins day after day. That's only part of it. A well-run plant is really 7 little businesses crammed under one roof, each with its own profit margin. Basic retail cleaning, suits, dresses, coats, that's usually 45 to 60% of revenue, with fat margins around 60 to 70%. Laundered shirts bring in another chunk, maybe 15 to 25%, but the margin's thinner, 30 to 40%, because pressing a shirt eats real labor time for not much money. Then there's the one that surprises everybody: alterations, hemming pants, taking in a jacket, swapping a zipper. It might only be 10 to 20% of revenue, but the margin runs 80 to 90%, because it's basically just a tailor's time and a spool of thread. No chemicals, no boiler, no solvent system. A shop pulling 60 grand a year from alterations alone might be keeping 45 of it as pure profit. Commercial accounts, hotels, restaurants, medical, bring lower prices per item but huge, predictable volume. And specialty work, like wedding gowns or leather, that can run $150 to $400 a piece. And then there's pickup and delivery, maybe 10 to 25% of revenue on its own, but it does something the others don't. It stretches your reach up to 10 miles past your storefront, and it locks the customer into a routine. Once somebody stops driving over to drop off clothes and just leaves a bag on the porch every Tuesday, they almost never switch over a small price difference. That convenience is customer retention, worth way more than the delivery margin itself. So the real revenue engine isn't the sign out front, it's the blend. But before any of that money shows up, you gotta build the plant. And this is where just rent a storefront totally falls apart. A laundromat is mostly plumbing and coin machines. A dry cleaning plant is an industrial chemical facility dressed up as a corner shop. You need a closed-loop cleaning machine. That alone runs 40 to 70 grand. A high-pressure boiler for steam, another 5 to 15,000. Finishing presses, form finishers, steam irons, 10 to 25,000 more. Then add air compressors, conveyor rails, a point-of-sale system built for garment tracking, plus the build-out, gas lines, high-voltage electrical, sealed concrete floors with containment basins in case a tank ever leaks, environmental permits. Add it all up, and a serious full-service plant can need anywhere from 150 grand to over 500,000 before you clean a single shirt. That's the trap first-timers fall into. They budget for the machine. They forget the plumbing, the permits, the containment, and the months of build-out before the doors even open. Now, you could buy an existing plant instead. One that's already running, with a customer list and proven contracts, might sell for 1.5 to 2.5 times its yearly owner earnings, which can land in the same range as building from scratch, or higher. But it comes with something a new build doesn't: customers who already trust the shop with their expensive clothes. Building that trust from zero, on top of paying for all the same gear, that's usually the harder, pricier road, even when the sticker looks cheaper up front. Once the plant's running, every garment that walks in becomes its own tiny manufacturing project. Sounds dramatic, I know, but stay with me. It gets checked in and inspected for damage, tagged, sorted by fabric and color. A spotter pre-treats stains by hand. Then it hits the solvent bath. After that, dried, inspected under bright light, pressed by a skilled operator, inspected again, bagged, and stored till pickup. That's about a dozen separate decisions for one shirt. And one slip anywhere, a scorched collar, a missing button, a stain that didn't lift, can lose that customer forever. There's basically zero room for error in a business built entirely on trust. Now multiply that dozen-step process by hundreds of garments moving through on the same day, every one belonging to a different person, every one needing to land back in the right bag. That's why tagging matters so much. Lose one jacket among 400, and an employee burns an hour searching racks that a barcode scan handles in 10 seconds. Multiply that lost hour across a busy week, and it's a real dent, plus an angry customer at the counter. Which brings us to the biggest expense most owners underestimate: labor. Labor usually eats 30 to 40% of gross revenue. And this isn't low-skill stuff. A master spotter has to know fabric chemistry well enough to lift a stain without bleaching the fabric underneath. A presser has to shape a jacket around a steam form without scorching it or leaving a shine mark. A skilled shirt operator can crank out 40 to 60 shirts an hour. An unskilled one? Way behind. And every hour of lost speed is an hour of wages producing less. Owners actually track this with one number: garments per labor hour. Pay someone $18 an hour and process 12 garments an hour, and your labor cost is about $1.50 per piece. But if that slips to 8 garments, bad layout, machine downtime, green crew, suddenly it's $2.25 per piece. That's a 50% jump on the exact same garment, just from a drop in skill and speed. And AI hasn't cracked this yet, because machines still can't shape a silk blouse or hand press a wool lapel the way an experienced human can. So labor efficiency stays the single biggest lever an owner's got over their own profit. That's also why good staff are so hard to replace. A master spotter isn't trained in a weekend. It takes years to build the judgment to tell a wine stain from a tannin stain from a protein stain, and know instantly which chemical fixes each without ruining the fabric. When someone like that leaves for a competitor, you don't just lose an employee. You lose years of judgment that showed up as fewer ruined clothes and fewer refund claims. Now for the part that quietly terrifies insurance companies, chemicals. A dry cleaner isn't just buying supplies, it's running a hazardous materials operation. Used solvent gets contaminated with body oil and dye, so it has to be constantly distilled and reclaimed. And what's left behind, called still bottoms, is classified as hazardous waste, hauled off by a licensed disposal company on a strict schedule. This is where it stops looking like a small business and starts looking like a regulatory operation. A solvent leak that seeps through an unsealed floor into the groundwater? That can trigger cleanup costs in the tens of thousands, sometimes way more. Regulators can fine you for incomplete waste paperwork, and a lot of landlords now require dry cleaning tenants to carry special environmental liability insurance, just because of what could go wrong under the floor. The chemicals themselves usually run 8 to 15% of revenue. Manageable, right? But it's everything wrapped around those chemicals, the disposal contracts, the insurance, the inspections, that becomes one of the industry's quietest, most stubborn costs. Think of it this way. A restaurant that buys bad produce just tosses it and eats the cost. A dry cleaner that mishandles chemicals can face a bill that follows the business for years. Cleanup, legal fees, higher premiums, long after the incident's over. That's a whole different category of risk. And it's exactly why landlords, lenders, and insurers treat dry cleaners way more carefully than a regular retail tenant. So location matters enormously, but not for the reason you'd guess. A dry cleaner doesn't need tourist foot traffic. It needs the same few hundred households and offices dropping off the same clothes, week after week, for years. Rent and utilities together should ideally sit around 20 to 30% of sales. Go over that in a spot that doesn't deliver steady local traffic, and the math turns on you fast. The best locations sit on the commute side of the road, with easy in and out parking, in neighborhoods full of high-income, dual-earner families, and some of the sharpest operators have stopped running a full chemical plant behind every counter. Instead, they run one big processing plant in a cheap warehouse district and set up several small, pretty drop-off counters in the pricey neighborhoods, shuttling garments back and forth. Keeps the expensive real estate tiny and the cheap real estate doing the heavy lifting. That one decision changes almost every number. A little drop-off counter in an upscale strip mall might need a few hundred square feet, a counter and a rack, instead of a whole boiler room. Low rent, even in a fancy area, while the actual risk stays concentrated in one spot where it's cheaper to manage properly. And this is where the real gold hides for a lot of operators. Commercial contracts. A hotel or hospital doesn't pay the premium an individual pays. Commercial might run $1.50 to $4.50 a piece, versus $7 to $20 at retail. The margin's lower too. More like 35 to 50% instead of 60 to 70. Sounds like a worse deal, right? Here's the catch. Commercial accounts hand you huge, predictable volume on the exact days retail customers aren't showing up. Retail folks cluster their drop-offs Monday morning and pickups Friday afternoon, leaving the middle of the week half empty. Commercial clients deliver steady volume every single day, filling those dead machine hours with paying work. A plant that fills its slow days with hotel linens and restaurant uniforms is running near full capacity, instead of sitting idle 3 days a week. Lower margin on hours that would have earned nothing? That still adds up to real profit. And there's a bonus a margin comparison misses. Commercial contracts usually lock in for a year or more, sometimes with auto-renewal. A hotel doesn't switch vendors on a whim, because renegotiating and retraining staff is its own headache. That stickiness gives you something retail never does. Revenue you can actually forecast 6 or 12 months out, which makes it way easier to plan staffing, negotiate loans, and survive a slow season without panicking. So with all that, permits, boilers, hazardous waste, skilled labor, You'd think this would be a pretty forgiving business. It's not. A lot of dry cleaners fail, and it's rarely one big mistake. The most common one? Buying oversized, expensive equipment before there's enough volume to justify it, locking yourself into heavy loan payments you can't cover early on. Right behind that, signing a lease where rent quietly creeps past 30% of revenue. Add overstaffing on slow days, skipped maintenance on boilers and filters that leads to expensive downtime, and the occasional wrecked designer garment that turns into a costly refund and a lost customer. And you can see how a business with 60% margins on paper still ends up underwater. Because the fixed costs, rent, debt, labor, don't shrink on slow weeks. Only the revenue does. None of these mistakes look dramatic in the moment. Buying a slightly bigger machine doesn't feel reckless when you sign the paperwork. Skipping one boiler inspection to save a couple $100 doesn't feel dangerous the week you do it. But these small, reasonable-seeming decisions compound. 2 years later, you're paying off equipment running at half capacity, patching a boiler that should have been serviced, and wondering why a business with strong margins on paper is barely covering the bills. Now, technology's rewriting a lot of this. Software built for garment tracking now handles intake, damage photos, customer preferences, and automatic pickup texts, replacing the old paper ticket system entirely. Automated conveyors can scan a barcode, physically find every piece of an order on a rail, bag it, and stage it, without anyone walking the aisle. Some operators have even installed unattended kiosks where you drop off or grab your clothes any hour using a phone app. No staff at all. What used to be a neighborhood shop is starting to look like a little logistics company that happens to clean clothes. And the case for all that tech is simple, even if the gear isn't cheap. Every barcode scan that replaces a manual rack search saves a few seconds of paid labor. Multiply that across thousands of garments a month, and a software subscription that costs a few $100 pays for itself many times over. Owners who refuse to upgrade don't lose money on any single order. They just leak tiny slivers of efficiency, over and over, until a better-equipped competitor down the street is quietly running the same volume with fewer employees. And that matters, because the whole industry is shrinking. Business casual dress codes, remote work, and cheap machine-washable synthetics have all cut how often people need a suit dry cleaned. Storefront counts have been dropping for years. But here's where it gets interesting. While the number of shops is shrinking, the strongest survivors are earning more than ever. The weak, inefficient shops are closing, and their customers are consolidating onto fewer, better-run plants. Industry data shows median owner earnings for well-managed cleaners landing around $132,000, on median revenue near $360,000. That's a healthy margin, close to 37%. And bigger operations doing over $600,000 a year sell for even higher multiples, because scale gives you room to absorb a slow month. So the industry isn't dying, it's consolidating, and the survivors are winning bigger. So what's a day actually look like for one of those survivors? It starts early, often before 5:30 a.m., lighting the boiler so there's steam pressure before the pressers even show up. Then a chemical check, testing solvent clarity, confirming waste levels, running distillation on yesterday's fluid. By 7, the counter opens and the morning rush of commuters begins. Midday is pure production, sorting, spotting, machine cycles, pressing lines running full tilt, all tracked against that garments per labor hour number. Delivery vans head out around noon for commercial and residential routes. Every finished piece gets one more inspection under bright light before it's bagged. The afternoon brings the return wave, people grabbing clothes on the way home, and the day ends with cash reconciliation, a boiler blowdown to clear sediment, securing the hazardous waste, and locking up, usually around 6:30. And notice what's missing from that whole day. The owner barely touches a garment. Almost all their time goes into managing people, machines, chemicals, and money, not cleaning clothes. So let's actually run the numbers, because this is where the real picture comes together. In a good year, a well-run, well-located plant pulling $360,000, labor around 35%, rent and utilities around 25%, chemicals around 10%, and the rest covering insurance, maintenance, and waste, can land close to $130,000 in owner earnings. But that assumes steady contracts, low turnover, and no major breakdowns. Now the realistic year. A boiler dies for 2 weeks during your busy season. An inspection turns up a paperwork gap and a fine. One designer coat gets damaged and has to be fully refunded. Labor creeps up because a skilled presser quits and the replacement's slower. None of that is rare. It's just the normal cost of a chemical-heavy trade. Run that same $360,000 through a bad year, and earnings can drop closer to $60,000 or $70,000, sometimes less. The gap between a good year and a bad one? Easily 60 grand or more, on the exact same storefront, with the exact same customers. And that gap is really the whole story of this industry, squeezed into one number. The equipment doesn't change. The location doesn't change. The prices on the wall don't change. What changes is execution, how tightly labor's managed, how well the machines are maintained, how fast a damage claim gets handled, and how much revenue's locked into steady commercial contracts instead of unpredictable walk-ins. Two owners can buy identical plants on the same street and end up in completely different places purely from how disciplined they are about the details customers never see. Before we wrap up, if you want a bigger breakdown of how small businesses like this are actually structured financially, from startup costs to real margins across different industries, there's a detailed written guide linked in the description and pinned in the comments. So here's the real takeaway. Nobody walks into a dry cleaner because their shirt is dirty. They walk in because they don't want to risk ruining something expensive, and they want it handled without having to think about it. A perfectly clean suit is invisible. Nobody notices it. They only notice when something goes wrong. That's the entire business, hiding in plain sight on every street corner. It was never really about the chemicals. It was always about making problems disappear before the customer ever sees them. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown useful, do consider hitting like and subscribing so you catch the next one.